Hi everybody, it's Gemma. Welcome back to Pampered Wolf. Today I'm going to be talking all about the nose and the chin and why on earth does foundation rub off those areas at the end of the day. Generally, you've got no foundation left on the tip of your nose and you've got no foundation off your chin because it's rubbed off. So how do we stop this from rubbing off? If you're interested in finding out, then please keep watching. Okay, so firstly, you might not need to do any of these steps. What I suggest you try first is take off all the heavy creams on the nose area. You can apply them all over the rest of your face, but before you put your makeup on, try not to apply any heavy creams around the areas that you're struggling to keep your foundation in place throughout the day. If you really do need to use those heavy creams because you have dry skin, then once you've applied those heavy creams, just take off the excess product that's sitting on the surface of the skin with a bit of blotting paper or a tissue. This will help you out no end, believe me. You may not need to try all these other steps. Also, try to apply your foundation in layers. Don't apply it all in one big lump. Tiny little bits at a time. So put a very, very thin layer of foundation over the areas that you are struggling to cover. Wait for that to completely dry and set in place before you build that coverage up. A lot of the time, all the product slips off your face because you're applying too much at one time. So try those tips first before you go into these, because these are quite long-winded tips. These can take a little bit of time. And I would say that these tips aren't necessarily suitable for everyday use. These are great if you've got a special occasion and you really want your makeup to stay absolutely perfect all day, but you might not want to do these steps every day. So definitely try the 2 steps that I've just said to you before you do anything else, because they may work for you and you might not need to do these. So let's go into step 1. Now step 1 really is for any oily skinned sufferers. Really isn't for anybody with dry skin, and I definitely wouldn't recommend this for dry skin. So if you do have dry skin, then just skip to step 2. But step 1 is using a setting spray and just putting that over the areas that you are really struggling to hold the product in place. So I'm going to be using the Urban Decay All Nighter. This is an excellent product, just a little bit of a spritz. I tend to put this on my T-zone because that is my oily area before I apply everything else, and it just locks out the oil and stops the oil from coming through all the other products. So step 2 is all about prepping the skin using your primer. So if you are struggling to keep a product on your skin, I seriously recommend a primer, and the primers that I like are more of pore filling primers because I have quite a few large pores on my nose. If I'm using an illuminating primer, I tend to steer away from my nose area because I just feel like it doesn't hold the product in place as well as a different primer. If you are struggling to blend your foundation around your nose area, and I know a lot of my subscribers are struggling to do this, you might be using the wrong primer. I'm not going to discuss that in this video. I am going to create a completely different video for that, so hopefully you'll tune into that if you're struggling with that as well. But this is just for product that's rubbing off the nose. So I'm a big believer in only applying primers where you actually need it. I tend not to apply my primers absolutely everywhere. So I'm going to be applying a pore minimizing primer, and my favorite one from the drugstore is by Maybelline, and it's the New Baby Skin Instant Pore Eraser. It's super, super cheap, and I really like it. So I just apply this to my fingertips, and I'm just going to pat that where I actually need it. I find it's a lot easier if you pat the product in place rather than really rubbing it into the skin. And I'm also going to place this on my chin because the tips that I'm giving you now aren't just for product rubbing off your nose. Product also rubs off my chin, and I found that if I use these techniques, product doesn't rub off my chin anymore. So a lot of people actually miss the tip of their nose when they're applying primer, so you just need to remember that the underside of your nose also gets foundation on it, so you need to make sure that you've got primer right on that tip as well. So once you finish patting that primer in place, you are ready for step 3. Now step 3, I wouldn't say is suitable for anybody who suffers with really, really dry skin. So if you do have dry skin, then just skip this step and go straight to step 4. The step 3 is all about powder, a very, very minuscule amount of powder. So you need hardly any. I'm going to be using my favorite RCMA no colour powder. This is absolutely excellent. It's about £13, $13 in the US, and you get 3 full ounces of product. Super, super cheap. I'm just going to dip my 106 powder brush in there and knock off every single little bit of excess on this brush, because when I say you only need a little bit of powder, I really mean it. The tiniest amount. And just dust that over the area that you really struggle to hold your foundation in place throughout the day. So mine's on my nose and on my chin. And that's it. Step 4 is all about the eyeshadow primer. Now, I've been recommending eyeshadow primers for the face for such a long time. In fact, probably since my channel started 10.5 months ago. Eyeshadow primers are amazing products if you have a problem area. If you wear glasses and you're finding that your foundation is rubbing off where your glasses sit on the bridge of your nose, and you've asked me a question about this in the past on my channel, the answer that I always give is to use an eyeshadow primer, because it's an excellent base to stick your foundation to. This also goes for if you have a blemish on your face that foundation just will not cover up or stick to. Eyeshadow primers, if you are struggling with getting foundation to stick to your nose or your chin throughout the day, eyeshadow primer. Now, eyeshadow primer isn't to be used all over the face. It will look a cakey mess if you do this, but a little goes a really long way, and it will do the job that you're wanting it to. Now, I prefer to add eyeshadow primers to my face using a brush or my fingers. I just feel like this works better, but obviously if you feel like a beauty blender works better for you, then that is how you should apply the product. Around the nose area, I do think that using a small brush like a 142 brush from ZOEVA, which is the one that I use, really does get into those nooks and crannies around the nose and covers the area really well without caking the product up too much. So I'm just going to use a tiny bit of eyeshadow primer. So the eyeshadow primer I'm going to be using is the P.LOUISE base. You don't have to have this eyeshadow primer, but it is fantastic. It's £10 in the UK, and I definitely haven't seen this sold in the US. But like I said, any eyeshadow primer will do. Urban Decay do some great ones, and Smashbox do a lovely one as well. So I'm just going to put a tiny bit on the back of my hand just so I'm not applying too much product. And I'm actually going to get some on my finger and pat that in the areas that I feel it's necessary. Then I'm going to take my concealer brush from ZOEVA, and I'm just going to move that product around and really blend it in place. You can do this with your fingers if that's what you want to do, but I just like to distribute it with a brush. Okay, so as you can see, I'm concentrating around my nostril area underneath my nose where I have a problem keeping my foundation in place on the Cupid's bow, and also right at the end of my nose and around and on the bridge. I don't know about you, but when it's really cold in the UK and I go from a heated building into the cold, my nose just starts to stream. So I'm constantly blowing my nose or wiping the end of my nose, which takes all the foundation off straight away. And this really, really helps it to stay in place. Also, if you're a glasses wearer like me, concentrate right on the bridge of the nose, and this will really help your foundation to stay in place underneath where your glasses sit on the bridge of your nose. So step 5 is exactly the same as step 3, just to add a tiny bit of powder to set the eyeshadow primer in place. Now again, if you have really dry skin, skip this stage and move straight on to step 6. So I'm just doing exactly the same as in step 3, taking a little bit of my RCMA no colour powder and just dusting it over the areas that we've applied the eyeshadow primer. This just sets everything in place. It's all about creating barriers and layers and a really good base to put your foundation. So step 6 is foundation. We are finally at the foundation stage. Now you can apply your foundation using your favorite method. My favorite method is using a brush, and I use the 103 Define Buffing Brush from ZOEVA. The best thing that I can tell you and the best tip about this stage is to apply the foundation to the back of your hand. Don't apply it directly to the face, and just apply a little bit to whatever you are applying your foundation with, whether that be a beauty blender, whether that be your fingers or with a brush, and just apply a very light layer of product. You don't want to be going in heavy-handed with this. Just apply what you feel is needed and then wait for the foundation to set. Then you can go in with a second layer if you feel like it's needed. If you go in too heavy-handed with too much product, you will find this goes cakey immediately, so you do have to be quite careful. So when you're applying the foundation to your problem areas, you want to make sure that you're patting the foundation in place, not dragging your brush over the areas that you've already done. It'll just make a real mess, and this is the method that I find works the best. If you struggle with blending foundation around your nose, there is nothing wrong with taking a concealer brush and applying your foundation using your concealer brush. If you feel like you need a little bit of extra coverage during this stage, you can apply your concealer around the edges of your nose here as well. Okay, so step 7 is again back to powder, and again a very, very small amount. Now even if you've got dry skin, I recommend that you try this step just to see if it works for you. If it doesn't work for you, then obviously skip this step in the future. But if you can set these areas in place, they are going to stick around for a lot longer than if you haven't set them in place. So just get the tiniest amount of powder like before on a little brush or on a damp beauty blender if that's your method of choice, and just dust it over those areas. Now you don't need to go all over the face if you are one of those people that really struggles with powder. If you feel like it makes you look really, really powdery, if it makes your skin go crepey or a little bit wrinkly, then just skip those areas. But the areas that you have problems with, so if you struggle with your nose or your chin, then just put powder on these areas just to set them in place. You don't have to put powder everywhere. So step 8 is completely optional, but I like to spritz a little bit of setting spray just over my problem areas to make sure everything is completely locked in place. After my setting spray is dry, I can then go and apply all the rest of my products. So I hope you found these tips helpful. Like I said before, this is not for an everyday routine unless you are seriously, seriously committed to not having any foundation rub off your nose or chin at all. I generally only use these tips if I'm perhaps going to a wedding where I know I'm going to be there all day and I want my makeup to look exactly the same in an evening as it did when I first applied it. So I don't use these tips all the time. Also, make sure that you've tried the 2 tips at the beginning of this video before you even start with the rigmarole of trying these 8 steps, because just a little bit of a tweak in your normal makeup routine might sort the issue. So make sure you try those 2 tips at the beginning of the video before you try these ones out, because you might not need to try them out. So I hope you found this video helpful. If you have, please do give it a big thumbs up. Don't forget I'm also on Instagram if you'd like to follow me on there. It's more of an insight into my personal life as well as the whole makeup world. If you haven't subscribed to my channel already, why not? There is a watermark in this corner. Get it clicked. It will take you through to my homepage where you can subscribe. Hope to see you all again soon. Bye.